The sun had long set, leaving the modest suburban neighborhood bathed in the cool blue of twilight. Nathan sat in his truck outside a small boutique hotel, his fingers drumming against the steering wheel. He didn't need to look at his phone again. The tracker app on Amanda's car had led him here, confirming what his gut had been whispering for months. 16 years of marriage, it had been a life built on trust, or so he'd thought. But trust doesn't account for unexplained absences, guarded text messages, and the faint scent of cologne that wasn't his. Amanda had left that evening claiming to meet a friend for dinner. She'd smiled warmly, kissed him on the cheek, and slipped out in a fitted coat that seemed a little too chic for a casual outing. It wasn't the first time, but tonight Nathan had decided it would be the last. Inside the truck, his breath fogged up the windshield. He wiped at it absently, his blue eyes scanning the building. The hotel wasn't fancy, but it wasn't discreet either. Exactly the kind of place someone trying to stay inconspicuous would choose. His pulse quickened when the lobby doors slid open, spilling light onto the pavement. There she was. Amanda stood on the threshold, her auburn hair catching the light like a halo. She glanced around before stepping outside, her movements nervous and deliberate. A man followed close behind. A younger man, maybe in his early 30s. Huh. Amanda laughed softly as he placed a hand on the small of her back, steering her toward the side entrance. Nathan's jaw tightened. There was no mistaking the intimacy of their body language. His mind raced, a storm of anger and heartbreak clashing with the calm, methodical part of him that demanded proof. Not yet, he told himself. Not here. Instead of confronting them, Nathan reached for the camera tucked under the passenger seat. He adjusted the lens, its metallic click somehow grounding him in the moment. He wasn't a man prone to impulsive decisions, and tonight would be no different. His plan had always been clear. Gather undeniable evidence, then confront her when there would be no room for lies or manipulation through the camera's viewfinder. He tracked Amanda and her lover as they entered a room on the second floor. Nathan's hands were steady as he snapped photos of the couple at the door, the man unlocking it with ease, Amanda slipping inside with a backward glance. It was over in seconds, the door clicking shut behind them. Nathan lowered the camera, his chest tight. He stayed there for a while, staring at the closed door, his thoughts a whirlwind of disbelief and grim resolve. His mind drifted to Sophie, his sister, whose recent warnings echoed in his ears. "Don't let your anger get the better of you," she'd said. "Use your head, Nathan. When you confront her, make sure she can't talk her way out of it." The truck's engine roared to life as he pulled out of the lot. He wasn't done yet. Tonight, he'd lay the foundation for what would come next. A confrontation so precise and undeniable that Amanda would have no choice but to face the truth. The game had begun, but it was Nathan who held the cards now. Nathan's home office had always been a refuge, a space for quiet reflection and problem solving. Tonight, it became a war room. The dim glow of his desk lamp illuminated stacks of documents, receipts, and a laptop with multiple tabs open. The smell of coffee lingered in the air, fueling his resolve. Hours earlier, he'd left the hotel parking lot, careful not to act rashly. Amanda's betrayal felt like a knife, twisting in his gut, but he knew anger was a weapon best used with precision. He needed more than photos of a hotel rendezvous. He needed to dismantle every lie she'd spun, piece by damning piece. The first step was her phone records. Nathan had access to the family plan account, something Amanda likely assumed he'd never bother checking. He scrolled through months of logs, noting repeated calls and messages to a number saved as Karen. His brow furrowed. Karen was Amanda's childhood friend, someone he'd met at parties and holidays. The idea that Karen could be involved felt surreal. But Nathan knew better than to dismiss it. He opened a browser and typed the number into a reverse lookup site. Seconds later, the result appeared on the screen. The number wasn't registered to Karen. It belonged to Paul, Amanda's coworker. The pieces began falling into place. Nathan leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his hair. He had heard Amanda mention Paul casually over the years, always in the context of harmless work events. It was a masterful misdirection, he realized, weaving the truth into her lies to keep him from questioning her movements. Next, he turned to their shared bank account. Amanda handled most of the household finances, and Nathan had trusted her implicitly. But now, as he combed through their transaction history, certain charges stood out: expensive lunches, hotel stays, and spa appointments. Some were vaguely justifiable, easily explained away if questioned. Others, like a boutique hotel charge on a date when Amanda claimed to have been visiting her sister, were glaring anomalies. Nathan flagged each suspicious transaction, his meticulous nature taking over. A spreadsheet began to take shape, organized by date, location, and cost. Each entry was another layer of the facade Amanda had constructed, and he was determined to tear it down. Midway through his work, his phone buzzed. It was a text from Sophie. Sophie, any update? Nathan, you were right. It's worse than I thought. Sophie, do you need me to come over? Hey, not yet, but I might need your help when it's time. Sophie's loyalty was unwavering, and Nathan was grateful for it. She had been the first to notice Amanda's odd behavior, the subtle shifts in her demeanor that Nathan had initially dismissed as stress or midlife restlessness. Next, Nathan pulled up the surveillance footage from the home security system. Amanda had always dismissed his insistence on installing cameras as overkill, but now they were proving invaluable. He scrolled through timestamps, looking for moments that aligned with her supposed girls' nights and late meetings. Time and again, the footage showed Amanda leaving the house dressed to impress and returning hours later, her expression unreadable. The final piece of evidence was Amanda's social media. He logged into her account using a password she carelessly shared years ago, back when trust between them was unshakable. At first glance, her profile seemed innocuous. Photos of family dinners, motivational quotes, and pictures of their dog. But buried in the private messages was a thread that made his stomach churn. Paul had messaged her about their next rendezvous, complete with the joking reference to our room at the boutique hotel. Amanda had responded with a laughing emoji and a teasing remark about keeping their secret safe. Nathan screenshotted everything, the cold fury in his chest hardening into resolve. By the time the clock struck 3, Nathan had amassed a small arsenal of evidence: texts, receipts, photos, and video clips. He stared at the files on his computer, their collective weight pressing down on him. This wasn't just about Amanda's betrayal anymore. It was about exposing the truth and reclaiming the dignity she'd stolen from him. Nathan sat back, his thoughts racing. He could feel the weariness tugging at him, but sleep was a luxury he couldn't afford. Not yet. Tomorrow, he would begin assembling his plan. It wasn't enough to catch Amanda in the act. She needed to understand the depth of her betrayal, to see how her lies had unraveled their life together. This wasn't about revenge, Nathan told himself as he closed his laptop. It was about closure. And when the moment came to confront Amanda, he would be ready. And it made the studio, as the dining room glowed with the warm light of the chandelier, an island of calm in an otherwise chaotic world. Nathan stood at the head of the table, his hands resting on its polished surface, staring at the gathered faces around him. Amanda sat to his left, her auburn hair cascading over her shoulder, an image of poise and charm. To his right sat Sophie, his steadfast sister, her arms crossed, an expression unreadable. Across from Amanda were her parents, Margaret and Harold, both looking slightly bewildered. The guest of honor, however, was conspicuously absent. For now. Nathan cleared his throat, his voice steady but edged with steel. Thank you all for coming tonight. I know it's unusual for us to have a family dinner like this on such short notice, but I thought it was important. Amanda smiled, though her eyes darted nervously to Nathan. He nodded, forcing a tight smile. I thought it was time we addressed a few things, cleared the air. The table fell silent. Amanda's parents exchanged a glance, their unease palpable. Sophie leaned back in her chair, her gaze flicking between Nathan and Amanda, waiting for the storm she knew was brewing. Nathan reached for the stack of papers on the sideboard behind him. He had spent the past week preparing for this moment, assembling every piece of evidence with the precision of a trial lawyer. He picked up a manila folder and placed it on the table, the sound sharp and deliberate. This, he began, is a collection of receipts, credit card statements, and hotel records. Amanda, do you recognize any of them? Amanda blinked, her smile faltering. Nathan, what is this about? He opened the folder, pulling out the top sheet. It was a receipt from the boutique hotel. This one's from last Tuesday. You told me you were having dinner with Karen. Yet this charge shows you spent the evening at the Rosendale Hotel. Care to explain? Amanda's face turned a shade paler. She hesitated, her polished demeanor cracking. Invasive, Nathan echoed, his voice rising slightly. He laid another document in front of her. And this one? A spa visit, booked during your work trip to Chicago. Strange, because I found out your office didn't have any events scheduled that week. Margaret reached out a hand to Amanda. What's going on, dear? Nothing, Amanda said quickly, her tone sharper than intended. Nathan, this is ridiculous. Are you accusing me of something? Nathan's piercing blue eyes locked onto hers. Accusing you? No, Amanda. I'm showing you, and I'm far from finished. Sometimes I'm not, and sometimes I really am. He turned to Sophie, who handed him a small USB drive. Nathan walked over to the television mounted on the wall and plugged it in. With a few clicks, the screen lit up, displaying a video feed of Amanda entering the hotel room with Paul. The room seemed to hold its collective breath. Margaret gasped, a hand flying to her mouth. Harold, usually stoic, stiffened in his chair. Sophie stared at Amanda, her expression a mixture of disgust and pity. Nathan, stop this! Amanda's voice was shrill now, desperation creeping in. This is a private matter. Private? Nathan snapped, turning to face her. Was it private when you brought him into our lives under the guise of a coworker? Was it private when you spent our savings on your escapades? Par progname, kayet tekopa, salada. Amanda's eyes welled up, but there was no sympathy in Nathan's voice. No, Amanda. You made this public when you betrayed me and everything we built. The doorbell rang, cutting through the tension like a knife. Nathan's jaw tightened. Perfect timing. Oh. He strode to the door and opened it to reveal Paul, looking smug in his tailored jacket. The man stepped inside, his arrogance faltering as he took in the scene. His eyes darted to Amanda, who now looked stricken. What is this? Paul asked, his voice faltering. Nathan gestured toward the dining room. A family meeting. Come in, Paul. You're the guest of honor. Paul hesitated, but stepped forward, his confidence returning as he sat down next to Amanda. I don't see why this has to be so dramatic. Nathan leaned over the table, his voice low and dangerous. Dramatic? You walked into my marriage, my home, and thought you could get away with it? Tonight, Paul, you get to see what accountability looks like. He pressed play on another video, a recording of Amanda and Paul laughing over drinks, discussing their plans to be together. Margaret and Harold looked horrified, while Sophie shook her head, disgusted. Amanda turned to Nathan, tears streaming down her face. Nathan, please. I didn't mean for it to go this far. Nathan straightened, his voice cold. You didn't mean for it to go this far? Amanda, you didn't mean for it to go. At all. But here we are. Pulled out another folder. Divorce papers. I'm done, Amanda. These are already filed. You'll get your copy tomorrow. Amanda sobbed openly now. But Nathan's resolve didn't waver. He turned to Paul. And you? I've sent every piece of evidence to your employer. I doubt they'll take kindly to your behavior. Paul opened his mouth to protest, but Nathan silenced him with a glare. Get out of my house. Both of you. Amanda stumbled to her feet, clutching Paul's arm. As they left, Margaret and Harold sat in stunned silence, unable to meet Nathan's eyes. Sophie broke the silence. You did the right thing. she said quietly. Nathan sank into his chair, the weight of the evening pressing down on him. He was free, but the cost of freedom was steep. As the door closed behind Amanda and Paul, Nathan resolved to rebuild, not for revenge, but for himself. And Nate, this took time. The house felt emptier than it had in years. Amanda's absence was tangible, as though her presence had seeped into the walls and now left them hollow. Nathan sat on the couch, staring into the flickering flames of the fireplace. It was late, but he couldn't sleep. The events of the evening replayed in his mind. The confrontation, the tears, the humiliation that had rippled through everyone in the room. He rubbed his temples, willing himself to focus. He'd planned every detail of tonight's revelation. And though it had gone as expected, the aftermath was heavier than he anticipated. There was no joy in Amanda's exposure, no satisfaction in seeing Paul squirm. Instead, there was an ache, a deep and abiding sadness for what had been lost. The silence was broken by a soft knock on the door. Nathan frowned. His first thought was that Amanda had returned. But when he opened the door, Sophie stood there, a bottle of bourbon in one hand and 2 glasses in the other. "You're going to need this," she said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. Nathan managed a weak smile as Sophie poured 2 glasses and handed one to him. She settled onto the couch, her gaze fixed on the fire. "So," she said, her tone light but edged with seriousness, what's next?" Nathan sipped his drink, the warmth spreading through his chest. "I don't know," he admitted. "I spent so much time preparing for tonight, I didn't think much beyond it." "Well," Sophie said, swirling her glass, "you're free now. That counts for something. Free." The word hung in the air like smoke. Was that what this was? Freedom? Nathan wasn't sure. He'd spent 16 years building a life with Amanda, and while she had betrayed him, there were parts of their marriage that had been real. Or at least he thought so. "I keep asking myself," Nathan said after a long pause, "when did it start? But was it something I did or didn't do?" Sophie turned to him, her expression softening. "This isn't on you, Nathan. You were a good husband. Amanda made her choices, and those choices have nothing to do with what you deserved." He nodded, but the doubt lingered. "It's just, how did I miss it? All the signs were there, and I ignored them." Sophie reached out, placing a hand on his arm. Her words offered a measure of comfort, but they didn't erase the questions swirling in Nathan's mind. What else had Amanda lied about? Were there other secrets, hidden chapters of their life together that he'd never know? He thought about the years they'd spent as partners, the laughter they'd shared, the promises they'd made. How much of it had been real? "I keep thinking about her parents," Nathan said, breaking the silence. "They looked at me like I'd destroyed their daughter." "Margaret and Harold have blinders on," Sophie said bluntly. "They've always seen Amanda as perfect. Tonight was probably the first time they've had to confront the fact that she's not." Nathan sighed. "I didn't want to hurt them, but they needed to know the truth." "They do," Sophie said firmly. "What they do with it is up to them. You can't carry their disappointment, Nathan. You've got enough to deal with." The fire crackled, filling the room with its soothing rhythm. Nathan leaned back, letting the tension in his shoulders ease. Sophie was right. He couldn't control how others responded to Amanda's betrayal. His focus needed to be on his own path forward. "Have you thought about what you're going to do with the house?" Sophie asked, breaking the quiet. Nathan glanced around the living room, its familiar corners now shadowed with memories he wasn't sure he wanted to keep. "I don't know. It's hard to imagine staying here, but it's harder to imagine leaving." "Maybe give it time," Sophie suggested. "No need to rush into anything." Nathan nodded. Time. It was something he hadn't given himself much of lately, caught up in the whirlwind of suspicion, discovery, and confrontation. Now that the storm had passed, he was left with a strange stillness, a space to process, to grieve, to heal. The conversation turned lighter as the night wore on. Sophie recounted stories from her own life, anecdotes that drew a few genuine laughs from Nathan. By the time she left, the weight in his chest had lifted, if only slightly. After Sophie was gone, Nathan lingered in the living room. He stared at the photo on the mantel, a picture of him and Amanda from their 10th anniversary. They looked happy, their smiles wide and unforced. Nathan reached for the frame, his fingers brushing against the glass. For a moment, he considered smashing it, letting the shards scatter as a metaphor for their broken marriage. But he stopped himself. Destroying the picture wouldn't change the past, and it wouldn't help him move forward. Instead, he placed the photo face down on the mantel. Then he turned off the lights and climbed the stairs to his bedroom. The bed felt too big, the silence too loud, but for the first time in months, Nathan felt the faint stirrings of hope. Tomorrow would come, and with it, the first steps toward a new life. He wasn't sure where that life would lead, but he knew one thing for certain: it would be his, and his alone. Oh, man. Oh, the morning sun streamed through the bedroom window, casting soft light across the room. Nathan stirred, blinking against the brightness. For the first time in weeks, he'd slept through the night. No restless tossing, no dreams of Amanda's betrayal intruding on his subconscious. Just sleep. A small victory, but one he would take. Oh, yeah. Downstairs, the house felt quiet, but not oppressively so. Nathan brewed a pot of coffee, the rich aroma filling the air. He leaned against the counter, holding the warm mug in his hands. The previous evening felt like a distant memory, though its weight still lingered. Amanda was gone, and with her the deceit that had poisoned their life together. What remained now was an empty canvas, and Nathan had to decide what to do with it. The first thing he did was call his lawyer. Divorce proceedings were already in motion, but there were practicalities to address: division of assets, the sale of the house, and a fair settlement. Nathan wasn't interested in punishing Amanda further. He simply wanted a clean break. Their lives had been tangled together for too long, and it was time to untangle them. Dangle them. Dangle them. The conversation with his lawyer was brief but productive. Afterward, Nathan grabbed a notebook and started listing the tasks ahead: canceling joint accounts, closing shared credit cards, and notifying the bank about the changes. It felt strange, reducing 16 years of marriage to a checklist, but it was also liberating. For every item he crossed off, Nathan felt a bit lighter. By mid-morning, Sophie called to check in. "How are you holding up?" she asked, her tone gentle. "I'm okay," Nathan replied, and for the first time, he realized he meant it. "It's strange, but I feel relieved, like I've been holding my breath for months, and now I can finally exhale." "That's good," Sophie said. "You deserve some peace." I said. They talked for a while, Sophie offering her unwavering support as Nathan shared his plans. She encouraged him to focus on the future, to think about what he wanted his life to look like now that he was free to shape it. "I know it's early," Sophie said before hanging up, "but maybe think about taking a trip. A change of scenery could do you some good." Nathan considered her words as he stepped outside onto the back deck. The yard stretched out before him, the trees swaying gently in the breeze. This house had been his sanctuary, but now it felt like a museum, full of memories that no longer belonged to him. Sophie's suggestion lingered in his mind. Maybe a trip wasn't such a bad idea. Over the next few days, Nathan began decluttering the house. He sorted through old photos, keepsakes, and mementos, deciding what to keep and what to let go. The process was cathartic, each discarded item symbolizing a step toward freedom. He boxed up the wedding album without hesitation, but he hesitated when he came across a bundle of letters a man had written to him early in their relationship. They were love letters, filled with promises of forever and a life they had once believed in. One evening, while scrolling through his phone, Nathan stumbled upon an old contact, a college friend named Josh who lived across the country. They hadn't spoken in years, but Nathan decided to reach out. Within minutes, Josh responded with enthusiasm, inviting Nathan to visit. It felt like a sign, an opportunity to reconnect with someone who had known him before his life had become so complicated. The day of the flight arrived quickly. At the airport, Nathan felt a strange mix of nerves and excitement. He boarded the plane, settling into his seat by the window. As the engines roared to life, he watched the ground fall away, the familiar landscape shrinking until it was just a patchwork of fields and roads. In the air, Nathan felt a sense of clarity he hadn't experienced in years. The betrayal, the confrontation, the fallout, they were all behind him now. Ahead lay the unknown, a future he would build piece by piece. By the time the plane landed, Nathan had made a decision. He wouldn't let Amanda's actions define him. He wouldn't be consumed by anger or regret. Instead, he would focus on rediscovering himself, on rebuilding his life with intention and purpose. As he stepped off the plane and into the bustling terminal, Nathan smiled for the first time in what felt like forever. The world stretched out before him, full of possibilities, and for the first time in years, he felt ready to embrace them.